When eggs vanish from supermarket shelves, the real shortage often began months earlier, inside a hatchery almost nobody has heard of. Not in the grocery aisle, not on the farm you drive past. In a tiny breeding pipeline where replacing one lost laying hen is slow, biological, and brutally concentrated. That is the story most inflation coverage misses. Egg inflation is not just a food story. It is a logistics story disguised as breakfast. The key bottleneck is the layer chick system, elite breeding stock, hatcheries, pullet growers, and then finally the hens that lay the eggs you buy. If avian flu wipes out millions of birds, you cannot simply tell the system to make more eggs next week. And I think this is one of the clearest examples of how modern supply chains really work. The shelf looks local, but the recovery clock is set far upstream by a handful of specialized companies and by biology itself. Start at the top of the pyramid. The global egg industry depends on highly selected breeding lines. Companies such as Hendrix Genetics, Highline, and Lohman Breeders sit near the top of that chain. They do not sell cartons to consumers. They control genetics, parent stock, and the speed at which commercial laying flocks can be rebuilt. Speed is the whole game. A supermarket shortage looks sudden. The breeding pyramid does not. First come pedigree birds and great-grandparents, then grandparents. Then parent stock. Then hatcheries produce layer chicks. Those chicks do not lay eggs for your breakfast tomorrow. They become pullets. And only after roughly 18 to 20 weeks do they start laying commercially. So when millions of layers are culled after an avian flu outbreak, the replacement timeline is measured in months, not days. In the United States, the 2022 highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak killed or led to the culling of more than 40 million egg-laying hens in its worst phase, according to USDA updates at the time. By 2025, recurring outbreaks had affected even more birds across categories. The number matters. But the deeper issue is what kind of birds were lost, where in the chain they sat, and how fast hatcheries could refill the pipeline. That is where grocery inflation begins to harden. Most people assume supply responds like a factory. Demand rises, producers add a shift, shelves refill. But eggs are not semiconductors, not crude oil. They are a biological flow. You cannot run a chicken on overtime. Here is the hidden rule. Hatchery and breeding capacity is not built to absorb giant shocks instantly. It is optimized for efficiency in normal times. That means a disease event creates a lag that travels forward through the system. Fewer parent birds today means fewer chicks tomorrow. Fewer chicks tomorrow means fewer laying hens months later. Fewer laying hens months later means higher retail prices long after the headline outbreak seems old. And this is where the logistics angle gets interesting. A layer operation does not just need birds. It needs clean barns, biosecurity resets, feed contracts, vaccination or monitoring protocols depending on the market, labor, transport, and coordinated hatch schedules. Reuters and the Financial Times have repeatedly noted that after major avian flu waves, producers face a slow repopulation process because barns must be sanitized and restocked in sequence. The bird is only one part of the queue. Look at the math from the consumer side. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported egg prices surging dramatically in 2022, and again showing volatility in later periods tied to flock losses. In some months, year-over-year price jumps exceeded 50%. In Europe, Similar pressure appeared after avian flu outbreaks and feed cost shocks. The shelf label looked like inflation. The mechanism underneath was a constrained biological rebuild. But there is another layer almost nobody discusses. The breeding pyramid is concentrated enough that resilience and efficiency are constantly trading places. A concentrated genetic system can deliver uniformity and productivity. It can also become a narrow throat in a crisis. If the recovery path depends on a small number of breeding and hatchery networks, then the market does not recover at the speed of consumer need. It recovers at the speed of that narrowest upstream node. I find that deeply revealing. We talk about inflation as if it starts at the checkout scanner. Often, it starts where the public never looks. Mini hook. But the bottleneck is not only about birds, it is also about time. And time in food markets is expensive. Consider what happens after a cull. A producer may secure replacement chicks, but those chicks need feed for months before they generate revenue. During that time, the farm carries cost without equivalent egg output. Corn and soybean meal prices matter here. And in 2022, the World Bank and other trackers showed broad feed inflation after the war in Ukraine disrupted grain markets. So the industry was hit twice: fewer birds and more expensive inputs for rebuilding them. That double shock helps explain why prices can overshoot. Retailers and wholesalers are not just pricing current scarcity. They are pricing the expected delay in normalization. If the market believes flock recovery will take 20 weeks, plus sanitation, plus hatchery constraints, plus transport friction, the futures mentality leaks into physical pricing. Consumers feel that as sticker shock. Now, ask a simple question. If egg prices are high, why not import more eggs? Sometimes countries do increase imports of shell eggs or egg products, but shell eggs are fragile, regulated, and often constrained by sanitary rules. Egg products help food manufacturers more than households staring at an empty shelf. And imported eggs do not rebuild domestic laying capacity. They only patch the gap. This is why the phrase "produce more eggs" is misleading. The real challenge is producing more future hens. That means more fertile eggs, more hatchery slots, more pullet housing, more disease control, and months of waiting. In logistics terms, the constraint is upstream throughput, not downstream desire. And the most uncomfortable part is what happens when the market finally starts to recover. As new flocks come online, supply can rebound fast enough to crush margins. The same industry that looked desperately short can suddenly look oversupplied. We saw versions of this cycle in different countries after past outbreaks. Producers who paid peak costs to rebuild may enter the market just as prices soften. That volatility is one reason firms hesitate to overbuild spare capacity. Insurance against shortage looks wasteful in calm years. Until it doesn't. But wait, there is a twist almost no mainstream inflation story mentions. The system is not merely slow because chickens take time to grow. It is slow because the industry protects the top of the breeding pyramid with extreme caution. And that caution is rational. Lose commercial layers and prices jump. Lose breeding stock and the recovery curve itself can break. That changes the way you should think about grocery inflation. The most important birds in the chain are the ones consumers never see. They live behind stricter biosecurity, tighter contracts, and more concentrated ownership. In other words, the visible market depends on an invisible reserve of genetics and hatch planning. If you want an analogy on a human scale, imagine a city losing taxis. Painful, expensive, disruptive. Now imagine the city also loses the factory that makes taxi engines. The shortage is no longer about replacing vehicles. It is about rebuilding the ability to replace vehicles. That is what the layer chick bottleneck does to eggs.